I was standing in my mother's kitchen on Christmas Eve, holding a wet dish towel in one hand and a stack of plates in the other, when I heard my father give away my $550,000 condo like it was an old sweater nobody wanted anymore. The house smelled like brown sugar, baked ham, and cinnamon candles. Everyone was laughing in the dining room. My sister was crying happy tears. My brother-in-law was already talking like a man who had keys in his pocket. And my father, Graham Waverly, raised his glass and told the whole family that my condo would be a fresh start for my sister's family after New Year's. He said her children needed a real home. He said family had to take care of family. He said it was settled. The only problem was simple. Nobody had asked me. My name was the only name on that deed. I had bought that place myself, paid for it myself, protected it myself. And while they all waited for me to smile and be the good daughter again, I stood there with that towel in my hand, clapped softly, and decided that Christmas night would be the last time they ever spent my life for me. My name is Elowen Pierce. I was 37 years old that winter, and for most of my adult life, I had been the reliable one. Every family has one. The one who answers the phone, the one who sends money quietly, the one who fixes the tax problem, the broken furnace, the unpaid bill, the emergency that is somehow never anyone else's fault. For years, my parents treated my paycheck like a family safety net. When Dad's prescriptions got expensive, I paid. When Mom's car needed repairs, I paid. When my sister Rosalie's husband, Keaton, lost another job and their rent was late, somehow my phone rang. I told myself I was helping. I told myself that was what good daughters did. But slowly, without saying the words out loud, they stopped seeing my help as kindness and started seeing it as duty. I became less like a daughter and more like an account they could withdraw from whenever someone else cried louder. That condo was never just a condo to me. It was morning light on my kitchen floor. It was the balcony where I drank coffee after years of working late nights. It was the first door in my life that locked from the inside and belonged only to me. I had bought it at 31 after saving for nearly a decade. I skipped vacations. I drove an old car with a heater that worked only when it felt generous. I packed lunches, worked overtime, and put every bonus into one account I refused to touch. My grandfather Silas had once told me, own something in your own name, Ellie, something nobody can vote you out of. I carried those words like a prayer. When I finally signed the closing papers, no parent sat beside me. No husband signed with me. No sister helped me carry the cost. It was mine. My proof. My piece. My little piece of the world. And somehow my family had looked at that proof and decided it was extra space I did not need. The first warning came before dessert. Keaton leaned across the table and asked, too casually, if my building allowed quick move-ins. Then Rosalie asked whether the second bedroom got good light for children. My mother, Dorothea, kept smiling at her plate like she was hiding a gift. I noticed a rental truck parked across the street and told myself I was being dramatic. Then I went into the kitchen to help clear dishes, because that was still my role. And through the thin wall, I heard my mother say the kids could take the second bedroom. Keaton could use the dining nook for his tools, and they could move in before school started again. Then she said, Elowen will understand. She doesn't need all that space. It's only her. I set the plates down very carefully. My hands did not shake. That was the strange part. Something inside me went cold and clear. I understood that they had not planned to ask me. They had planned to announce it in public, surround me with children and Christmas and applause, and make my yes feel like the only decent answer. Then my father stood up. He tapped his glass with a spoon and gave a speech. Hard year, family unity, grandchildren needing stability, Rosalie needing help. Then he smiled at me like a king asking his subject to bow and said he and my mother had decided to give my condo to Rosalie's family as a Christmas gift. The children cheered. Rosalie covered her mouth and cried. Keaton looked at me with a little challenge in his eyes. My father lifted his glass and said, It's settled. Those two words burned harder than any insult. It's settled. As if my signature was decoration. as if ownership was just a feeling, as if the life I built could be passed around the table with the gravy. Everyone looked at me, waiting, so I smiled. I clapped. I said, "What a generous Christmas." And in that moment, I stopped being their reliable daughter. I became an accountant again. I started doing the math. If you have ever been the person everybody uses because you are strong, listen closely. Sometimes the trap is built so that your pain looks like selfishness. If I had shouted that night, they would have called me cruel. If I had cried, they would have said I was dramatic. If I had said no in front of the children, I would have become the aunt who stole their bedrooms. So I did not argue. I drove home with both hands on the wheel and let the silence do its work. By the time I pulled into my parking space under my own balcony, I had remembered a message from 8 months earlier. A property investor named Calvin Rourke had once offered to buy my condo in cash. I had refused because I loved my home, but now I understood something painful. As long as I owned that condo, my family would treat it like a family pantry. Something to open whenever they were hungry. There was only one way to stop them forever. I had to make it unavailable. I had to make it gone. The next morning, Rosalie texted me a photo of her children standing outside my building, pointing up at my windows. She wrote, "They already picked their rooms. Thank you, Ellie." A second message asked if I could be out by January 10th because they wanted time to settle before school. She used the words, "be out," like I was a tenant in my own life. I made coffee. I read the message again. Then I wrote back only, "We'll talk soon." After that, I called a real estate attorney named Marin Vale and asked one question. If I was the sole owner, the condo was paid off, and nobody else was on the deed, could anyone stop me from selling? Marin actually laughed. She said, "Elowen, no one gets a vote on property they do not own. A cash sale could close fast if the title was clean. Maybe before New Year's." I hung up and sat there for a long time, feeling grief and power rise in the same breath. I gave my parents one chance. On December 27th, I sat at their kitchen table and told them plainly that the condo was mine. I told them I had never agreed to give it away. I told them my name was the only name on the deed. My father's face hardened. He said I was making money more important than family. My mother patted my hand and said Rosalie needed it more. She said I was single, successful, and could always buy something else later. That sentence finished what Christmas started. She was not trying to be cruel. She truly believed my life was the extra piece. My comfort was optional. My work was available. My home was negotiable because I had always seemed fine. I looked at both of them and realized facts would not save me. They had built a whole world where I existed to absorb everyone else's emergencies. So I stopped explaining. I said I would think about it. Then I went home and called Calvin Rourke. Calvin answered on the second ring. His offer still stood. In fact, he raised it slightly because the market had moved. Cash, no financing, no delays. His title company could open the file the next morning and close on December 30th if I was serious. I told him I was serious. Then I sent everything to Marin and asked her to make it airtight. The next 2 days were the quietest battle of my life. My family kept texting about moving dates, curtain colors, school forms, and which elevator would be easiest for the furniture. Keaton showed up at my door with a tape measure and a rented dolly asking to measure the second bedroom for bunk beds. I did not let him inside. He said my father had promised and the family had already decided. When I told him the condo was not his to measure, his smile disappeared. He said I was outvoted on my own home. I closed the door in his face and leaned against it, shaking for the first time, not from fear, from the force it took not to scream. On the morning of December 30th, I signed the closing papers in a small office that smelled like coffee and toner. It took less than an hour. That is the part that still haunts me. A home can take 10 years to build and 40 minutes to release. I signed where the little flags pointed. Calvin signed across from me. The title officer stamped the final page. The funds hit my account that afternoon. Just like that, the condo was no longer mine. I went back one last time, stood in the empty living room, and let myself feel the loss. I had not wanted to sell. I had loved that place. But I had chosen this loss over another kind of loss, the kind where people take from you and still call it love. Before leaving, I opened the folder my grandfather had given me years before. On the front, in his square handwriting, were 3 words: yours, no vote. I touched those words and whispered, I did it. Then I locked the door for the last time. New Year's Eve dinner was more crowded than Christmas. My father had invited cousins, neighbors, even 2 old church friends. He wanted witnesses for his generosity. Streamers hung over the mantel. Rosalie sat like a guest of honor. Keaton wore a smug little smile. My father had a brass key tied with a ribbon, a cheap prop for a home he did not own. I came in quietly with a folder in my bag and sat through dinner almost silent. If this story is reaching you, stay with me here, because this is the part where the quiet person finally stops protecting everybody else from the truth. After dessert, my father stood, tapped his glass, and gave the same speech again. Family. Sacrifice. A fresh start. Then he held up the key and announced that Rosalie's family would move into my condo on January 1st. He looked at me and said, It's settled. The children have a home now. Everyone clapped. Rosalie cried. Keaton reached for the key like he had earned it. Then I stood up. I did not yell. I did not curse. I simply opened my folder and placed 2 papers beside the champagne. The first was a copy of my deed, with my name highlighted. The second was the closing statement dated December 30th, signed, stamped, and final. I slid them toward my father and said, You cannot give away something that was never yours. The room went still. My father picked up the closing statement. His eyes moved over the date, the signatures, the final sale. His face changed slowly, like a wall cracking in winter. Rosalie stopped crying. Keaton set the brass key down with a tiny, useless click. My mother whispered, What did you do? I looked at all of them and said, I sold it before New Year's. The condo is gone. Keaton exploded first. He shouted that I had ruined his family, that the truck was booked, that the children had chosen their rooms, that I was heartless, bitter, selfish. Rosalie cried that I had embarrassed her in front of everyone. My father slammed his hand on the table and said I had no right to make a family decision alone. That almost made me laugh. I waited until the shouting thinned, then I gave them their own words back. I said, You told everyone I didn't need all that space because it was only me. I looked at Rosalie, then at Keaton, then at my father. Now none of us have it. Silence hit the room harder than any scream could have, because the math was clean. They had tried to spend what I owned, so I converted it into something they could never touch. My mother was the only one who hurt me. She looked small in that crowded room and said, Honey, we thought you would understand. You always seemed so fine. And there it was, the whole story. I was fine so I could pay. I was fine so I could wait. I was fine so I could give. I was fine so my home could become someone else's rescue plan. I told her gently, That was the problem, Mom. You decided I was fine, so you thought my life was something you could spend. Then I told them the sale money was mine. My future was mine. I had accepted a job in Savannah and would be leaving within the week. I said I loved them, but I would never again be the family emergency fund. Then I took the spare key to my parents' house from my coat pocket and placed it beside my father's useless brass key. You can all manage from here, I said. Then I walked out. Nobody followed me. They were too stunned. But as I reached the front door, my Aunt Verity spoke from the corner of the room. She said, She's right. I remember her buying that condo. None of you helped her. That was the witness I needed. Not for court, for truth. I stepped into the cold night and breathed like a woman who had been underwater for years. On January 1st, I drove south with my car packed to the roof. By noon, I had 68 missed calls. Keaton left angry voicemails. Rosalie sent long messages about broken children's hearts. My father called 3 times and left nothing, because men like him wait for the world to apologize first. My mother left one message that simply said, Please call me Ellie. I cried in a gas station parking lot because love does not disappear just because a boundary appears. But I did not call back, not that day. The fallout was simple. Rosalie's family did not get my condo because there was no condo to get. Keaton returned his rented truck and paid fees he could not afford. My father had to explain to every person he had invited that the gift he bragged about was never his to give. And for the first time in years, when the family had a crisis, my phone was not the one that answered. I did not feel cruel. I did not even feel victorious. I felt quiet. I felt like someone who had finally stepped off a sinking boat and realized dry land had been waiting the whole time. So here is the lesson I learned the hard way. Loving your family does not mean letting them spend your life like loose change in a jar. You are allowed to own something nobody gets to vote on: your home, your money, your peace, and most of all, yourself. If you have ever been the reliable one, the strong one, the one everyone uses and nobody checks on, tell me where you finally drew your line. Because sometimes the strongest revenge is not screaming, sometimes it is signing the paper, closing the door, and leaving them with the key to nothing. Commentary, discussion, explanation, and lessons. Now let's slow down and talk about what this story is really showing us. This is not only a story about a condo, it is about respect, ownership, family pressure, and the pain of being the person everyone uses because they think you will never say no. Elowen did not lose her home in a normal way. Her family tried to take it from her with smiles, Christmas dinner, emotional pressure, and the word family. That is what makes the insult so deep. They did not ask. They announced. They treated her property like a family gift before she even had a chance to speak. The most painful part is how calm everyone was while doing something so wrong. Her father stood up in front of the whole family and acted like he was being generous. But he was not giving his own house. He was giving away his daughter's hard work. Her sister cried happy tears. Her brother-in-law acted like he had already won. And the children were used as emotional pressure. This is why Elowen did not fight at the table. She understood that if she got angry, they would call her selfish. If she cried, they would call her dramatic. So instead of giving them a loud reaction, she gave them silence. And that silence became her power. What makes this revenge strong is that it is not wild or childish. Elowen does not scream, break anything, or beg anyone to understand her. She uses proof, she uses the deed, she uses the law, she uses timing. Her family tried to control the room with emotion, but she controlled the truth with documents. That is a very important point. In life, when people are trying to twist the story, proof speaks louder than arguments. She had the deed, she had the closing papers, she had the final date, and when she placed those papers on the table, the whole room had to face reality. The condo meant more than money. It was her independence. It was the result of years of saving, working, and standing on her own feet. So when her family said she did not need all that space because she was single, they were really saying her life mattered less. That is the hidden wound in this story. Many people, especially reliable daughters and older women, understand this feeling. Sometimes families think the strong person does not need care, comfort, or protection. They think, she will be fine. But being strong does not mean being empty. It does not mean your dreams are available for everyone else. The ending is powerful because Elowen does not just sell the condo. She takes back her identity. She returns the spare key. She stops being the emergency fund. She chooses a new job, a new city, and a new life. The revenge is not only that her family loses the condo. The real revenge is that they lose access to her unlimited sacrifice. They finally have to live without the person they kept taking from. So what do we learn from this story? First, love without boundaries can become a trap. Second, family does not have the right to vote on what belongs to you. Third, if people only respect your silence, they may not deserve your sacrifice. Fourth, proof is stronger than shouting. And finally, you are allowed to protect your peace even when other people call it selfish. This story reminds us that sometimes the most powerful line is not spoken in anger. Sometimes it is signed on paper, sometimes it is a locked door, and sometimes it is walking away while everyone else finally understands what they lost. The end.